CBS Sports.
High drive, center field, hit the wall, grand slam. This is magnificent.
Got a fantasy question? Email fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. Get ready to win your league.
Where fantasy becomes reality.
Now here's Frank, Scott, Chris, and Adam.
Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today, and welcome to our first base position preview. Frank Stanfield, joined as always by Scott White and Chris Towers. If you're listening to the podcast, you are hearing this on Thursday, February 11th. And if you're watching us live on YouTube and Twitch, welcome. It's Wednesday night. Thanks for joining us. As always, we're hitting everything first base position today. And with that, Scott, we'll start off with you. The NL and AL MVP were both first basemen. Does that mean that the position is back to its glory days?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm not even sure that I buy that one of the MVP winners is going to perform up to that same level again.
I wonder who you're talking about, Scott.
Yeah, I don't think first base is bad. I think it's just old players gravitate toward there because it's the easiest position to play defensively. It has the lowest athletic threshold. So a bunch of old guys either wind up there or they just stay there until they get old. And we're naturally inclined to distrust older players for good reason. I mean, a lot of them show signs of decline, and yet they're still hanging on because they're able to stick at first base. So I don't know that it's a weak position. It's kind of a boring position. It's an unexciting position. And, it's not as good as like shortstop. Obviously, shortstop has really become the position of studs that first base used to be.
Scott, I've got to say, I mean, you know how to kick off a position preview podcast. First base is boring. It's old. I hate it. It's not as good as shortstop. But that is the real reality of the situation and what we're dealing with here. Chris is also with us. Chris, how's Call of Duty going for you?
Good. Got a win 2 days ago, so I was happy with that. Got a little trios victory. Haven't played any today. So just trying to focus on work, keep my nose to the grindstone. But thanks for asking.
I'm proud of you, kid, because it is tough out here on these Call of Duty streets.
The streets of Verdansk are, they're on fire.
That they are. So speaking of first base, it seems like it is an okay position. What I noticed is that it could dry up faster than most positions because there are multiple players that can be used at other positions at first base. So DJ LeMahieu, Max Muncy, Mike Moustakas could all be used at second base as well. Max Muncy could also be used at third. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., it sounds like he might get an opportunity to play third base again, so he could be potentially moved there throughout the fantasy baseball season. And Dom Smith, someone we'll talk about today, also has outfield eligibility. So, Chris, I'll throw this one your way. Where is the cutoff of first basemen that you would consider starters for your fantasy baseball team?
I would be comfortable. I'm looking at ADP. I'd be comfortable going as far as Josh Bell, but I have him ranked higher than Eric Hosmer and Ryan Mountcastle, who are going ahead of him. I think he's going to bounce back. So I think there are more starting caliber first basemen, and there's a couple other guys who I would, be okay starting as well. I think there are more starting caliber first basemen than positions to fill in your league, is what I would say.
Okay. I think I'm probably looking at that Anthony Rizzo, Max Muncy, Paul Goldschmidt as like the last tier that I wouldn't mind having as my starting first baseman, regardless of format, head-to-head points or roto. Scott, what do you think about that? Where's the cutoff for you?
Yeah, I mean, I could make do with somebody lower in than the three you just mentioned, but Mike Moustakas, Rhys Hoskins, Carlos Santana, they're kind of the last names in what I consider the startable tier. And a couple of those guys I'm thinking more for points leagues anyway than roto. And that takes us, that tier at least how I have my rankings set up, that takes us 15 players into the first base position. The problem is, as you mentioned, you got Bellinger outfield eligible, LeMahieu second base, third base eligible, Dominic Smith outfield eligible, Max Muncy second and third base eligible, and then Moustakas second base eligible. And so, how many names was that? 5. So we're talking about 10 who are for sure going to be drafted to play first base. Now it's likely Bellinger, Dominic Smith will, because outfield is at least as deep as first base, if not a little deeper. But it's possible they'll be drafted for the outfield too. So you can't, it's not a position where you can just kind of wait for the best thing that falls to you, whatever that happens to be. At some point, you have to make a move at first base.
Yeah, I think both first base and third base are kind of similar. Third base is a better position overall, but they don't have the superstar depth that shortstop does. But I think there are more usable players at each position. Shortstop, it's a great position for about 12 or 13 spots, and then it gets real dicey.
Yeah.
That's not to say there aren't, usable or good players after that, but, first base, if I end up with Hunter Dozier as my corner infielder in a roto league, I'm actually okay with that. I think he's going to have a bounce back season. There are first basemen who I can wait for, who I don't, I wouldn't want them as my starter, but I can be okay with them.
I do think third base has a little bit more star power. I'm looking at about 7 names at third base that I think are truly elite players or have the ability to be elite players. I don't know that I could say that about first base. So let's get into it. We have some ADP analysis, sleepers, breakouts, and busts, our favorite first baseman to draft. We also have some prospects a little bit later on, so we'll talk about all that. But let's jump into ADP. And at the top, you're going to be making a decision in the late first, early second round regarding Freddie Freeman versus Cody Bellinger. The ADP for Freeman, 12.3, Bellinger at 15.3. These are the two undoubtedly top first baseman in fantasy baseball, and I don't think it's really close. In Roto over the past 3 seasons, Freeman has finished as the 6th overall player, 11th overall, and 25th overall player. Cody Bellinger, meanwhile, has finished 67th overall, 5th overall in his MVP 2019 season, and 63rd overall in 2018. The head-to-head fantasy points per game also favor Freeman more consistently during that span as well. Freeman, since 2018, a distant first in runs scored, RBI, and batting average among first basemen. Bellinger, to the surprise of nobody, is the leader in home runs and steals, 35 steals for Bellinger, 18 for Freddie Freeman. So these are the last 2 National League MVPs. Freeman's coming off a career year. Bellinger is coming off shoulder surgery after he dislocated it, celebrating a home run in the World Series. Scott, who you got? Freeman, Bellinger.
I got Freeman. Now he's probably going to take half a step back from his MVP season as well. It was career numbers. It was small sample, obviously, and you get some outlier production because of that. I think Freeman's outlier production in 2020 was closer to his norm than what you saw from a lot of players who delivered outlier production, because we know he's as elite as they come at hitting line drives, one of the safest bets for batting average that there is, and he's been an established power hitter for several years in a row. Pretty consistently goes at the first, second round turn in fantasy baseball. So I think that's an appropriate place to draft him. When it comes to Freeman versus Bellinger, I originally had Bellinger over Freeman, but two things changed my mind. One, you pointed out that over their last 162 games, the last 162 games for each of them, Freeman had better stats pretty clearly. And the other is that issue with his shoulder, now coming back from shoulder surgery, and some question as to whether he'll be ready in time. He probably will, but there's some question there. And just, what effect will it have on him performance-wise? Just last year we saw him make a change to his stance for some reason coming off an MVP season, and maybe that had an effect on his production. It's hard to say.
That's a little it's a little like Jose Ramirez in 2018 when he went into that extended slump, just changing his approach to try to beat the shift, even though he was beating the shift. Which can kind of give you hope that with an off season, he can get back to it. And the thing with Bellinger that gives me hope is the biggest improvement that he made from 2017, 2018 to that 2019 MVP season was the strikeout rate. And he sustained his plate discipline gains in 2020. And so, part of me wonders is, did we just see the worst part of Cody Bellinger's season and he didn't get a chance to break out of it? If the season had been 60 games in 2019, Cody Bellinger's probably the number one pick.
I think I still think Cody Bellinger's most likely scenario is closer to 2019 than to 2020. And the fact that he's the only one of these two that's going to be helpful in stolen bases, really, I think gives him more upside for Roto. But it's close enough that with all those risk factors on stapled to Bellinger that aren't for Freeman, I'll take Freeman.
And Freeman has his worst season over the last 5 is an 893 OPS. He had 192 combined runs and RBI in that year. He's just one of the 5 best hitters in baseball.
Yeah, it might just be a question of consistency with Freeman and safety versus potential upside with Bellinger. But honestly, I don't even know that their upside is that different, at least based on what we just saw.
In Roto, it is.
Where, look, Freeman steals a few bags, man. He's going to get you 5 to 7 steals. We were talking about this before we started. It looks painful when Freddie Freeman runs. Like, I don't think he's fast, but like Albert Pujols used to steal bases too, and he is not fast either. So they are very deceptive with their speed on the base paths. The last 162 games that you mentioned, Scott, I'll mention this. Cody Bellinger, 255 batting average, 41 home runs, 109 runs, 97 RBI, 14 steals. Freddie Freeman, 307 batting average, 38 home runs, 125 runs, 142 RBI, and 7 steals. Chris, would you actually take Freeman? Because I feel like a while back you said that you would take Bellinger ahead of him.
Yeah, in points, Freeman is a couple of spots in my overall rankings. I think it's 10 to 15. Roto, it's right back to back. I think I have Freddie Freeman 1 spot overall ahead of him.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more worried about Cody Bellinger, but more on that a little bit later on. DJ LeMahieu is the 3rd first baseman off the board with an ADP of 26.5. He returns to the New York Yankees, where he should still be very good, likely an elite player, but we'll save him for tomorrow on the second base preview because he is likely atop the position for all 3 of us. That brings us to my guy, Jose Abreu, who is now going in the 3rd round at pick 33.3. His ADP last year was 73. His ADP in 2019 was 85. So this is far and away the highest that you have had to draft Jose Abreu, and it comes at the age of 34 with him coming off likely a career year in a shortened 2020 season. So I do have some Jose Abreu fun facts for you before we completely tear him apart, because I feel like that's exactly what we're about to do. Only once in his career has he had a batting average below 284, and that was when he had testicular torsion back in 2018. I'm sure we all remember that. Probably Jose Abreu a little bit more than we do. Even at 34 years old, Jose Abreu has raised his hard contact barrel rate and average exit velocity in 3 straight seasons. Since entering the league in 2014, Abreu is second behind only Nolan Arenado with 671 RBI, and I will go as far as to say I think Abreu is probably one of the 5 biggest contributors in the RBI category in Roto or head-to-head categories leagues. Last season, he had 60 RBI in 60 games, a pace of 162 over the course of a full season. Little trivia for you. Can either one of you name the last time a player had at least 162 RBI in a season?
Oh, man.
Was it Juan Gonzalez?
I don't think he ever quite got there.
It was not. I can look it up to see if he's done it, but he's not the last person to do it.
Was it during the 90s?
Was it Hack Wilson?
It was during the 90s.
Okay.
Right smack daddy in the midst of the steroid era.
Oh, Sammy.
It was not Sammy. He had 160. I think it was in like 01.
Oh, man.
You guys give up?
Was it Luis Gonzalez?
It was not Luis Gonzalez.
Okay, who was it?
It was Manny Ramirez in
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
1999. I think he had 166 RBI and 147 games played. It's an absolutely massive season. All right, so with that, Jose Abreu is awesome, and he drives in a lot of runs. Scott, what are your thoughts on Jose Abreu in this cost?
Well, Jose Abreu is a good player. He's been a very consistent player. He's been always been underrated in terms of batting average, as you pointed out, Frank. And so, generally, I'm going into a season arguing for Jose Abreu, I feel like. But it was just such an outlier performance for a guy who's already in his mid-30s, and like it just screams, okay, a guy had an especially hot stretch during a 60-game sample, and so he was able to put up numbers unlike we're used to seeing from him and win an MVP award. And so his going rate in the middle of the third round is kind of drafting him as if that's the new standard for him. I mean, there's a reason we weren't drafting him in the middle of the third round in years past. And by the way, I have him. I take him in like the fifth round, so I'm marking him up some from where we used to rank him. I'm not totally discounting the possibility that he could be improved or that he's a clear standout at a position that's a little light at the top. But I think anybody who drafts him at his going rate is going to be disappointed because we know who he is, and it's not what we saw in 2020.
Chris, before you crush my dreams as a Chicago White Sox fan, a long-standing, since day one, Chicago White Sox fan, what are your thoughts on Jose Abreu? When would you actually feel comfortable drafting him?
I think I have him in that fifth round range. I have him 55th overall in Roto. I would guess around the same in head-to-head points. He is, I think, like you said, one of the very safest bets for RBI. And he might be the single player who year in and year out overperforms his overall production based on RBI, if that makes sense. He is usually not one of the best hitting first basemen in baseball. Before last season, his rank in OPS among qualified first basemen was 12th in 2019, 11th in 2018, 6th in 2017. He's a really safe player who's going to drive in a bunch of runs because he's a contact-oriented hitter for a power hitter in a very good lineup. And his numbers with runners on base are, I believe, consistently much better than overall. He is one of those guys who hits better in those situations. That being said, I think he's probably going to be a little more normal in everything but RBI. And so that's where it gets hard for me to pay that premium for him is, paying up for 33 home runs and, 85 runs and a 280 batting average. Is that real? Or 285 batting average? Is that really what I want to do at first base? Probably not. But it's probably not going to hurt you either. It's hard to see as safe as a 34-year-old can be. Jose Abreu is, I think.
Mercy!
Hawk Harrelson will have none of that. None of that Jose Abreu slander, Chris. But with all that being said, if the ADP is 33 on draft day, I will not be drafting him there either. But you could wind up in a draft room where everyone feels the same way as us, and then he starts to slip down because I told you this last week, Scott. I was in a 15-team Roto draft where he lasted all the way to pick 51. If we get to that point, sure. Late fourth or early fifth round pick, I can get behind that. It's also worth pointing out that in Jose Abreu's career, his best month by far is August. 987 career OPS in August, and his second best month is September, 884 OPS. So I don't know how much those numbers were driven up by just last year, but it seems like he really does feast during those months. So I guess it benefited him that the season started right exactly at that point. After Jose Abreu at pick 33, we have a decent drop, and then we have three first basemen go in a row in the fifth round. Pete Alonso at pick 54, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at pick 55, and then Luke Voit at pick 56. since the start of 2019, nobody in baseball has more home runs than Pete Alonso, who has 69. Nice. Speaking of home runs, nobody had more than Luke Voit in 2020. He had 22 home runs. And then there's Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who we think has big power upside because he hits the ball as hard as anybody. We often hear that max exit velocity is a stat that correlates with power. The problem, as we know by now, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. hits a lot of his balls on the ground, a 51% ground ball rate. He has talked so far in the offseason about getting himself in shape. There's been pictures about him being in better shape. So maybe that allows him to lift the ball better moving forward. Scott, which of these first basemen would you draft first among Alonso, Voit, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? And will you actually be targeting this group?
I probably won't be drafting any of these specific names because I think they're all going too high. Or let's just say there are players who I think could offer similar production who are going much later. One in particular, and I'm sure we'll get to him. But this also kind of reveals why I don't think it's worth paying up for Abreu, because when you have Luke Voit out there, you have Pete Alonso out there. I think the expected production for all three is comparable. I mean, Abreu has a batting average edge, but I would probably give those other two, Voit and Alonso, a home run edge over Abreu. And I just don't think he has as clear an advantage over those two and maybe some other first basemen as the ADP shows. I have them all in the same tier. The one you mentioned who I don't have in the same tier is Vladimir Guerrero, who people are going to keep paying for that upside. One of these years, Vladimir Guerrero is going to make them look good for doing it. He's only 21 years old, so I'm certainly not writing him off. But he's the kind of proven production you're taking to draft him in round 5, the kind of proven production you're passing up to take him in round 5 for a hypothetical season is just, it just doesn't work for me.
Chris, what do you think about this? Last year, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I think we can all agree he didn't have a great season. It was probably...
he's been disappointing both seasons so far. I think it's undeniable.
Yeah, I mean, he has a sub 800 OPS. I think it's 778 to this point in his career. Even with that, he finished as the 82nd best player in Roto last year. So I think last season was probably something close to his floor. I don't know that he's going to get much worse. And that would kind of be my argument for drafting him, is that his upside is we're talking about him as like a first or second round player come next year. So what do you think about that and this group in general?
Well, he played 60 games. And that was the most games you could play last season. Legally, we're not allowed to play more than 60 baseball games,
unfortunately.
And so finishing 82nd when you played 60 games, it's not that impressive, because that means that there are probably some players who were a lot better who played like 54 games. And since that was 10% of the season, missing that time hurt even more in that regard. So, I think it's probably a situation where Guerrero was probably never really a top 100 player last season. And it's actually kind of stunning. I looked back at his NFC ADP over the last 3 seasons. It has been between 53 and 58 each of the last 3 seasons. So Vladimir Guerrero coming up with all this hype, disappointing both seasons. His value has not changed in the eyes of the people drafting. Maybe that's smart. We are talking about, a historically productive minor league player at a very young age, and he's still only, he'll turn 22 a little bit before opening day. It's still a little shocking to see 1999 as a major league player's born date. He's probably going to have a really big season at some point. It may even happen this year. But 183 games is definitely too early to write him off, but it's not too early to start at least having the discussion that maybe this isn't the guy we hoped he would be. I don't know yet. I wouldn't draft him there. And I think it's probably a situation where, since we'll play, probably 10 leagues out or something like that, I will have Vladimir Guerrero somewhere just because I will make the decision to draft him. But if I'm drafting for, my normal team's most likely outcome, I probably don't take him.
It's the FOMO, Chris. Last year I had it late in draft season regarding Luis Robert. And it hurt that I didn't wind up with him. Speaking of the 1999, the date that you brought up, his birth date, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., that was the first time in my life that I felt old, is once I realized athletes were actually being born after me. I was like, man, it's all downhill from here. There's no coming back after this.
Who was the first baseball player born after you?
Oh, man. I'm born in 91, so I mean, there's a bunch of them now. It's like whoever's.
I know, but who was the first? You acted like it was such a big moment. I know who the first was for me. It was B.J. Upton.
Oof. I don't know who the first one was. I don't know which player. I just remember the moment that I was, wow, this sucks. But yeah, I think, Chris, your point about the volume of games that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. played last year was a good one on a per game basis. According to his fantasy points per game, he averages 2.9 fantasy.
That's pretty lackluster.
And that is the same amount as Jamer Candelario, Christian Walker, Wilmer Flores, Garrett Cooper. So to your point,
some legends.
You're right. He wasn't really all that great. In case people are wondering why Luke Voit is going this late after finishing as a top 12 player in both Roto and as a top 12 hitter in head-to-head points leagues, he had plantar fasciitis, which is a foot injury that can linger. And per NJ.com, Voit said the platelet-rich plasma injection he got to treat his plantar fasciitis has worked like a charm, and that he doesn't expect it to return in 2021 or ever. Voit said he tried putting orthotics in his cleats to help the issue. He'll also reach out to Nike about custom cleat designs. If you're like me and you have no idea what orthotics are, they are
like special insoles.
Yeah, it's prescription medical devices, which is a fancy way to say that.
I've got plantar fasciitis. It sucks. But obviously I'm not a professional athlete. So,
does it go away, Chris?
Not for me. It's nice if after I go running, I roll a cold beer bottle under my foot. That helps. Maybe Luke Voit can try that in the locker room. But
I thought you were going in a different.
That's the kind of thing that Albert Pujols has dealt with a lot in the second half of his career. And I don't think it's fair to say it's slowed him down much. I think it's just he got old. But I think Luke Voigt's really, really good. He's also another guy I won't be drafting at this value, and that's just because you're drafting at the peak of his value. He's not going to have a better season than he did last year.
Well, Chris, if we were drafting him at his peak, then he would be a first-round pick.
But you're drafting at him at the peak of his ADP. Whereas last year he was going 100, 130 spots later.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is correct. The reason I bring it up is just because if people are wondering why he's going at this point, like why he's going later than he probably should, I think it's because of the plantar fasciitis. I think some people are kind of worried. Also, I guess there's a chance he's traded. I've heard, trade rumors regarding him, but that's not a reason to fade him. Just the price in general probably is. Last year, I kept asking this question: why draft Pete Alonso when you can get Matt Olson 30 picks later? Well, that's because Matt Olson hit under 200 and he finished 35 spots behind Alonso in Roto. The ADP is similar so far this season. After Luke Voit goes at 56, there's about a 30-pick drop until you get to this next group of 4 first basemen that are going 12 picks apart. That includes Matt Olson at 85.3, Paul Goldschmidt at 87, Max Muncy, who has first, second, and third base eligibility, at pick 95, and Anthony Rizzo at pick 96. With the exception of Matt Olson, who I think is a fine Roto player. He's not going to be great for batting average, but I think he could be a standout in home runs and RBI, and I think he could probably be okay in runs. I think the other 3 of these names, Muncy, Rizzo, and Goldschmidt, are great for head-to-head points leagues or in OBP formats. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, Rizzo, I actually tier with Abreu, Voit, and Alonso for points leagues. Muncy, you're more likely to draft him as a second baseman, but yeah, he has a high OBP middling batting average, and that's usually a recipe for head-to-head points success. The one I want to talk about here, though, is actually Olson, because he was that player who I think is just as good as Voit and Alonso. I mean, you already made the comparison, what we were saying last year, why draft Alonso when you can draft Olson 30 picks later. I think it still applies. I think the profile is still basically identical. I understand Olsen disappointed more with the batting average last year than Alonso did, though they both disappointed with the batting average. But, Olsen was one of those players who had a career worst strikeout rate in a year where a lot of players did, in a very weird year, in a very short year. And he had some horrible BABIP luck that combined to drag down his batting average by that much. Still hit 14 home runs. I mean, the power, he still impacts the ball like an elite power hitter, Alonso does. And it's just rare you see two profiles that align as closely as Alonso's and Olsen do, and it's still a 30-pick difference. So Olsen in rotisserie leagues, in traditional 5x5 category leagues, Olsen is the first baseman I always go into every draft hoping to get. He's the one I will probably have the most shares of this year. He's the one that, to me, is being the most clearly undervalued, and the reason why I have very little interest in drafting Voit, Alonso, or even Jose Abreu.
Olsen, Rizzo, and Muncy in particular, I have labeled the bad BABIP bros because last year they were just incredibly unlucky, as you highlighted, Scott, with Matt Olson in particular, a 227 BABIP, 277 for his career. Anthony Rizzo had a 218 BABIP, 286 for his career. That was hurt by a career high 17% infield fly ball rate, which really just kind of came out of nowhere for Anthony Rizzo. And then Max Muncy, 203 BABIP, 266 for his career. He might be the one that I'm worried about the most, just because his line drive rate was, it dropped about 10 percentage points from 23% to 13.8%. But yeah, all three of those were very unlucky. And then there's Paul Goldschmidt, who kind of found the fountain of youth, and he was really good. Chris, what do you think about this group?
Goldschmidt, there was a couple years ago where you could tell it seemed like he kind of started cheating a little bit to try to maintain his power production. And we saw the strikeout rate, contact rate go up, or contact rate go down, strikeout rate go up. Last year seemed to make the opposite decision. And, that might make him more of a points league specialist, but if he's in a good Cardinals lineup with Nolan Arenado helping them take a step forward, that could be a lot of runs and RBI for him if he can, maintain the gains he made as a contact hitter. I do want to stop at Matt Olson and, just ask a question that's similar to the why take Pete Alonso when Matt Olson's there 30 picks later. Why take Matt Olson when Miguel Sano's there 140 picks later, or whatever, 110 picks or whatever it is?
Yeah, it probably shouldn't be.
There's injury concerns for Sano.
Yeah,
but if you put them on a 150 game pace over the last last two seasons, Sano hasn't beat in runs by 21, home runs by 5. He's a little behind in RBI, and he's a little behind in batting average. But I think that the difference between Olsen and Alonso, I think, is Olsen has a much wider bar or range where his batting average can fall. He's a lefty.
Olsen?
Yes. Than Alonso.
Well, his could go much higher than Sano's could.
No. I mean, I'm comparing him to Alonso.
Oh, okay.
I think Alonso's a safer bet for batting average. Even though the most likely outcome is probably pretty similar for them. Sano obviously strikes out much more than either of them, which is saying a lot because those two strike out a ton. But he has a historically high BABIP. I think it's 340 for his career. So he actually doesn't hurt you in batting average as much as you would expect.
Yeah.
I don't like paying up for, I never like paying up for that profile either way with either Olsen or Alonso.
You're probably going to get one shot at your starting first baseman. It's not deep enough that you can expect to make good with a backup first baseman you draft or to find one off the waiver wire. Of course, it's possible you will, but probably just get one shot at it. And I don't want that shot to be taken on Miguel Sano. I don't mind getting him as my corner infielder,
right? No,
that's if I'm trailing in the power categories. Yeah. But for my starting first baseman, it's no contest who I want between Sano and Olsen. One, as you pointed out, is liable to strike out 36% of the time. The other probably 26% of the time, and then you add the injury risk on top of that.
Yeah.
And
no,
Olsen,
I'm not saying Olsen
is much safer.
I'm not saying Olsen shouldn't be drafted ahead of Alonso, but
yeah.
I think the most likely outcome for both of them looks very similar production wise. And, for what it's worth, Alonso's hitting 233 since the 2019 All-Star break.
I was just about to point out the last 162 games for Alonso, 248 batting average with 50 home runs. The last 162 for Matt Olson, 250 batting average. So still not great, but slightly better than Alonso with 43 home runs. So sacrifice a little bit of power there. I do agree. I think Olson's range of batting average outcomes is probably a little bit wider than Alonso. Like it could be lower, but I think if we're just doing like a mean projection, I probably would have them both around like 250, if that.
Yeah.
We're going to get back to ADP in a little bit. I just want to quickly promote a few things. Once again, thank you to everybody who is joining us live so far tonight on YouTube and on Twitch. We'll be here whenever we record a podcast. So more often than not, that will be around 10 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights. We'll be back here again tomorrow to preview the second base position. And I did want to let everyone know that our Fantasy Baseball Commissioner product over at CBS has launched. The product is built for everybody, regardless of league type. Dynasty, keeper, salary cap, AL only, NL only. We have it all at CBS, fully customizable. Create your own stat categories and adjust scoring by position. It features a deep player pool, including minor leaguers, and there's even a feature to add your own player. There's franchise building, detailed player contracts, custom keeper rules, and trading future draft picks for those deeper dynasty formats. But the biggest endorsement is honestly that I have used the CBS Commissioner product for my home keeper league for the past decade. Scott White has his dynasty league that we talk about all the time, running on CBS and all kinds of crazy rules. And, you know, he's done it for however, what, 7 years, Scott? And
7 years. But, you know, my longest running fantasy baseball league, I started playing on CBS freshman year of high school, which was 2003. So, you know, we're coming up on 20 years of playing on CBS for me, playing CBS Commissioner specifically.
Speaking of the Dynasty League, still waiting for Chris to send me a trade offer with Joe Musgrove. But seriously, if you do have any questions about our CBS Commissioner product, or if you're thinking about getting it, or you have any issues whatsoever, just hit us up on Twitter or email us fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. If you are watching on the video side right now, don't go anywhere. If you are listening to the podcast, we are going to take a quick break. But when we come back, sleepers, breakouts, and busts at first base. So let's jump right in. Scott, get us started with a sleeper at the first base position.
Josh Bell. Nobody seems to want Josh Bell anymore. Nobody's giving him the pass for a terrible 2020 that so many other hitters are getting, even though, I mean, he was unquestionably performed like a stud in 2019. And what really hurt him last year was so uncharacteristic for him. I understand that big power breakthrough in 2019. You know, we hadn't seen that before, and he kind of slumped in the season. So, you know, maybe there's some skepticism from that. And the reaction to 2020 is like, see, I told you so. But like his strikeout rate blew up last year, and he, for his entire career, had been a low strikeout guy. So, you know, he's somebody who complained about not having access to video in games, which players will have access to again. It's been confirmed. They'll have access to video again. And after the Nationals acquired him, they talked about they found a flaw in his swing that they're confident they're going to be able to correct. And if that's the case, I mean, you're getting him now. He goes beyond the 160th pick overall. Like you're really not forfeiting much by taking a flyer on Josh Bell, who I think has like second, third round potential as a hitter. It just seems like a great opportunity to buy low on a player, and literally a case of the fantasy baseball community as a whole sleeping on a guy who, his numbers 2 years ago, like 37 homers and a 950 OPS or something like that. Just ridiculous production from him.
The ADP for Josh Bell is 161.8. So, man, yeah, you're getting him at a steep discount compared to last year. The ADP in 2020 was 93.5. So he's going about 70 picks later than he was last year.
Yeah, I thought it was too low then for what it's worth. I guess I was wrong, but that shows you what the upside is.
I have him very close to his 2020 ADP.
Oof.
So I have
him as a top 100 player and a top 12 first baseman.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I wanted
planting a flag on Josh Bell.
I like it. I wanted to also point out that in addition to the mechanical flaw that the Nationals found, it was recently confirmed that we will have in-game video for the 2021 MLB season. And Josh Bell was one of those players that complained about not having in-game video last year. So if you're buying that excuse, that's just another reason to buy into one Josh Bell. Chris.
It's okay, Frank. I don't listen to Scott either.
Did he say that?
Yeah.
I did, but I'm glad you extended the point because I think that was the first mention of it on the podcast.
Now, I appreciate you calling me out for that. And you should call me whenever I do, because I've listened back to stuff and I'm like, Scott just said that. Why did I repeat him? There are times where like I have so many tabs open that I'm trying to figure out, all right, what was Josh Bell's NFBC ADP last year? And I'm pulling that up. So I'm like kind of paying attention to Scott, but kind of not paying attention to Scott. And sometimes I do fall victim to that. So
nobody pays attention to me on the show. Nobody.
No, come on, Scott. Chris.
You're the only one worth paying attention to, Scott.
That is true.
I'm definitely last.
Chris, give us a sleeper that we shouldn't pay attention to for this year.
Nathaniel Lowe, who I imagine you have also as your sleeper pick. I told you before the show you were going to like my sleeper pick. But I'm right there with you. He has not been great in the majors so far, but he seems like a guy who kind of deserves not a free pass, but I think you can understand why someone might struggle to get into a groove when they're not playing every day. This is something that the Rays, for all their brilliance and everything that they do right, it might be tough for the guy, outside of the Austin Meadows and, a handful of other guys who play every day. It might be tough for guys to get into a groove when they're in and out of the lineup that much. And especially when you're young and you're establishing yourself. Nate Lowe has, some real pop. He was a great plate discipline guy in the minors. And I think moving into a new team where he's going to get the opportunity to play every day and playing in a better lineup is going to be really good for him.
Did you guys stop talking? I'm sorry.
Were you getting your Rangers hat?
I legitimately bought a Rangers hat because they traded for Nate Lowe. I love the Rangers. I love everything about them. I'm still pulling for Willie Calhoun. I hope that he is awesome. To Marcus Evans, I hope that you are the closer at some point this year. I am now not just a Yankee fan, but I am a Chicago White Sox fan since day one. And now I am a Texas Rangers fan since 2021. So yes, very excited about Nate Lowe as well. He's free from the tyranny of the Tampa Bay Rays. Massive minor league numbers, 2019, a 929 OPS. In 2018, a 985 OPS. Performed well against left-handed pitching throughout the minors as a left-handed batter. And while he didn't have many batted ball events in 2020, a 114.8 max exit velocity, that was 19th in baseball with a 15% barrel rate. So I think that there is a chance that Nate Lowe is just awesome and he hits like 280 with 30 home runs, and his ADP right now is 347. So love that call. Scott, a breakout at first base.
Oh, I don't love my choices here, but I'll say the prospect Andrew Vaughn, because there seems to be Chris Getz. I think he's the White Sox farm director, and I saw a quote from him recently about how he thinks he's a candidate to make the opening day roster. They have an opening at DH. Obviously, Vaughn and Jose Abreu could split first base and DH duties if that comes to pass. If it isn't on opening day, it'll be soon afterward. I expect Andrew Vaughn will be one of the first prospects called up, unless the White Sox go and add another hitter between now and then. And third overall pick in the draft 2 years ago. You don't see true first baseman drafted that high very often. It says something about how good Vaughn's bat's going to be, and all the scouting reports make him out to be this middle of the order hitter in every respect. Average power, gets on base a lot, just a really projectable bat that you could easily see making a significant fantasy contribution right away. So I'll go with Andrew Vaughn as my breakout. Thought about Jared Walsh, but I like Andrew Vaughn more. I don't actually like Walsh that much.
I hadn't heard that quote that he might break camp. That does, because I had just kind of assumed he wasn't going to be there.
Let me see if I can find the exact quote while you're
talking. I have seen that possibility floated around. So if he doesn't break camp, there's at least a possibility that he's up very early in the season. Again, that is Andrew Vaughn of the Chicago White Sox. Chris, a breakout for you.
I'll go with someone Scott likes a lot, Ryan Mountcastle. He is the Orioles have been frustratingly patient with their top prospects because they haven't been trying to win games in recent years, and that's why Ryan Mountcastle didn't make it to the majors until he had played an entire season where he put up an 871 OPS as a 22-year-old in AAA. He did get his chance last season, and he looked very good, and he looked like the kind of player that we were hoping to see. Not a ton of power, but enough, and just a good hit, someone who I think could hit 25 homers and hit 280. And, he only gets help from Camden Yards. That's a great park. And the rest of the parks in the NL or the AL East are pretty good as well. So I think Ryan Mountcastle is someone who could provide similar production to what we're expecting from Anthony Rizzo or Paul Goldschmidt, or a couple guys who aren't necessarily very exciting at their ADP in like the 80 to 90 range. But when you get Ryan Mountcastle in the 15th round, it starts to look like a much more viable profile.
I know Scott has used the Nick Castellanos comp for Ryan Mountcastle in the past, so that would definitely play in Camden Yards. We could see something like 270 plus batting average, 25 to 30 home runs, which would probably be a very similar season to someone like Anthony Rizzo. I think you're right about that. Breakout for me, I'm going to go with Dominic Smith. I guess he kind of broke out already last year, but he's being drafted outside the top 100. I think some people might be worried about him losing playing time because of there being no DH in the National League. And I guess that's always a possibility because the Mets are just the Mets and they find a way to shoot themselves in the foot. But Dominic Smith is 25 years old. He's younger than Pete Alonso. And since the start of 2019, 139 games, he has been awesome. We are talking about a 299 batting average with an OPS over 900. He can hit lefties. His StatCast data last season was awesome. I think there's a chance that we're talking about Dom Smith if he plays every day all season as someone who slashes this ADP next year, and that we're drafting inside the top 50 or 60 picks next season. So pretty excited about one Dominic Smith. Scott, hit us with a bust rather quickly if you could.
Yeah, I'm going to say Vladimir Guerrero here for reasons I more or less already gave. I just think he's a lot more likely to hurt you at his going rate than help you. And it's a pick I could see you regretting for the entire season.
Chris, bust? Question mark?
Jose Abreu. For the same reasons we said earlier, you're paying for him at his peak value. He's a 34-year-old. And, I don't think there's enough. For all the guys who do get knocked for their age, Jose Abreu does not appear to be one of them. And maybe people just don't realize he's 34 years old. But, there's always a chance that the fall off happens and it could be quick.
For me, I have Cody Bellinger, and I kind of teased this a little bit earlier. I'm just kind of really worried about this shoulder injury coming back from it. Apparently, there was a report just yesterday that he hasn't taken full swings yet. He's only taking swings with one hand. So maybe eventually he gets going. I think there's a chance he gets off to a slow start. So maybe you look to buy low early in the season on Cody Bellinger. He also has struggled against left-handed pitching in 2 of the past 3 seasons. 681 OPS in 2018 against lefties, 666 OPS last season in 2020. Small sample size again against left-handed pitching. Scott, give me one name, the one first baseman that you will draft most this season.
I kind of already gave it. Matt Olson is the one I'll probably draft most, but I'm thinking that's mostly for rotisserie leagues, categories leagues. If it's a points league, I might just hold out for Carlos Santana, who people are completely writing off after a career worst season. And, he's in his mid 30s, so I can understand the argument that maybe Carlos Santana is just washed now. But you look at the underlying numbers, he was the exact same player as always last year, exactly the same. And, combined ADP, he's going like 230th overall. Now that's for categories leagues. I imagine it's much higher than that in points, but it's still going to be a discount for a guy who's just been so bankable at that format that I really have no objections to taking him as my starting first baseman after filling in most every other spot in my lineup.
Speaking of the Kansas City Royals, just before we got started, they completed a trade to acquire Andrew Benintendi. So this lineup is not one of the best in baseball, but it's coming together. Whit Merrifield, Adalberto Mondesi, Salvador Perez, Carlos Santana, Jorge Soler, Benintendi, Hunter Dozier, and then, Michael Taylor, Nicky Lopez there at the bottom. But it's a pretty good lineup. Chris, Just give me a name. The first baseman you will draft most this season.
I was sorry. I was frantically trying to find the odds for RBI leader for MLB in 2021 because Eric Hosmer is the best bet. I don't say he's the most likely, but he probably has really long odds. And this is a guy like Jose Abreu, even when he's been mediocre, like in 2019 when he had a 735 OPS, he had 99 RBI. The Padres lineup is stacked. He's going to hit cleanup in it. And I buy that he improved last season. He's not going to be an extreme fly ball hitter like he was early, but his ground ball rate never topped 50% in any month last season. It's only 2 months, but still. It shows that he didn't regress all the way in the second half of the season. And so
it was pretty high though in September though, wasn't it?
It was like 49%, which is high, but it's not. This is a guy who's usually 55 to 60%. And so if he can be a 49% ground ball rate guy, I think you're probably looking at 25 plus home runs. And I think he legitimately could, hit 290 with 120 RBI. It's not unrealistic.
Eric Hosmer was awesome last season. So I really like this call. He averaged 3.6 fantasy points per game. And that would have, it did rank 2, 4, 6, sixth best at the position among first basemen. He had 26 RBI in
36 and 38 games.
36 and 30.
Almost Jose Abreu. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a massive number. I really like that call. For me, I think it's probably going to be Anthony Rizzo in points leagues and Matt Olson. I'm going to get quite a bit of Matt Olson in Roto and category.
Not if I can help it, Frank.
Not if you can help it. If anyone's wondering how much to pay for these first basemen in a salary cap draft, here are Scott's values for the different tiers. This is for assuming a 12-team salary cap draft, standard $260 budget. You have Freeman at $35, Bellinger at $33, Abreu and Voit at $22, Alonso at $21, Olsen at $20, Goldschmidt at $14, Rizzo at $13, Vlad Guerrero Jr. at $13, and then Mike Moustakas at $10. Names like Josh Bell, Rhys Hoskins at $7, and then you got your Buck Bash, Brandon Belt, and Yuli Gurriel. We spent enough time on the ADP of the other gentlemen that are going early. So let's just pick it up here with Dom Smith. I'll quickly get your thoughts on him. Scott, we got this email from Mark Esposito who wonders, with the NL not having the DH, will Dom Smith lose at bats this season?
That's what I'm worried about. Otherwise, I'd be gobbling him up at his ADP in terms of fantasy points per game last year. He was elite. And there's all the usual short season caveats need to apply to that, but he still deserves to go higher based on the way he performed and based on his pedigree prior to last year. It's just, will the Mets be confident every day with JD Davis at third base and Dominic Smith in left field? Because if not, then playing time could become an issue for both.
Out here in the streets of New York, the Mets have been referred to as the New York mess at times. So they can certainly mess the situation up. Please do not do it.
Good Springsteen song.
Dom Smith is kind of on an island in ADP 107.3, as is Mike Moustakas with an ADP of 124.5. I'm a big fan of Mike Moustakas. I think he's kind of boring and undervalued.
So boring.
Chris, what do you think?
So boring.
The Moose.
So boring. But he's going to hit 30 plus home runs. And he'll drive in some runs. The Reds lineup's going to be a lot better than it was last season. I don't know what happened in Cincinnati last year. I think they had the lowest BABIP as a team ever. And it was like everyone had a 212 BABIP. I don't know what happened. They didn't have to face Trevor Bauer, so they don't even have that excuse.
I am basically buying all the Reds not named Eugenio Suarez because I feel like they're all undervalued. So Castellanos, who's that? Castellanos, Mike Moustakas, even, Senzel and Winker going later on in drafts. I'm going to take some flyers there as well. Drop down in ADP. We have 4 decently fun names that we've already mentioned a few times here, going 15 picks apart. Hosmer at pick 148, Mountcastle at 150, Josh Bell now with the Nationals at 162, Rhys Hoskins, of course, coming back from, I don't think it was like a full Tommy John surgery, but it was kind of like a partial Tommy John surgery. His ADP is at 165. Scott, what do you think of this group? Hosmer, Mountcastle, Bell, Hoskins.
Well, if I don't end up with Carlos Santana in a points league, it's probably because I got Rhys Hoskins instead. And certainly I have some concerns about the elbow. The fact that it wasn't Tommy John, full-blown Tommy John, is encouraging. It makes me hopeful he'll be able to make a full recovery. The discount, I think, is more than enough, considering that in head-to-head points leagues last year, so just doing head-to-head points per game, it went Freddie Freeman 1, Jose Abreu 2, DJ LeMahieu 3, Luke Voigt 4, and then Rhys Hoskins 5 with 3.7 head-to-head points per game. He's somebody who could potentially lead the league in walks, and that is very valuable in that format specifically.
Drop down a few more picks in ADP. Trey Mancini going at pick 182, of course, recovering from cancer and will be returning this season. Miguel Sano going 2 picks later than Trey Mancini. Boom Boom Mancini, as they like to call him. He had a breakout 2019 season, top 30 hitter in both roto and head-to-head points. Miguel Sano, his last 2 seasons, which is 158 games, 233 batting average with 47 home runs. Chris, I know Sano is one of your boys. What about Trey Mancini?
I like Trey Mancini as well. It's kind of an open question how he's going to, play coming back from, his recovery. But, assuming he's the guy he was before, I think he's a great value. He's a really solid hitter.
If I can just interject for a second, in CBS leagues, Mancini will not be first base eligible to begin the season. I'm sure, and maybe some other providers he will be. If he is eligible at first base, it completely changes my approach to the position, because I would be totally content to draft Mancini as my starter if I missed out on all the quality options before that. His number, like, he was a 290-ish hitter with 35 homers 2 years ago. It was numbers like you'd expect from JD Martinez. So, I love getting him, whether it's in the outfield or if it's to be my first baseman, wherever that's possible.
Great point about Trey Mancini there, which reminds me at the 57-minute mark of the podcast that Keston Hiura will be playing first base. So probably should have been part of this conversation, but we will talk about him on tomorrow's podcast. The second base position preview, we can kind of work in, how does it affect his value now that he should have first base eligibility early on in the season? Again, that's Keston Hiura, who's expected to move over after the Brewers signed Colton Wong to be their starting second baseman. Just outside the top 200 in ADP, we see a group of Christian Walker, Jared Walsh, your boy Carlos Santana, and Yuli Gurriel. So we know you like Santana, Scott. Do you like any of these other names here?
I think there are a lot of fine contributors here. This is kind of where the depth appears at first base relative to other positions. Yeah. Like, you don't want any of these guys as your starter in a 12-team head-to-head points leagues. They're probably not even going to be drafted. But if you play in something deeper, there's a very good chance you're going to fill your corner infield spot with one of these guys. Christian Walker appears very safe. Jesus Aguilar, I think, is a pretty safe choice. I'm not even sure we're to him in ADP yet, but the Marlins first baseman, who had a pretty decent bounce back season last year. I mentioned Jared Walsh earlier, who hit 9 home runs last September with only like a 16% strikeout rate, and kind of beat out Albert Pujols for the starting first base job this year as a result, I think. And he's been a guy who's had big home run totals in the minors. So I think, like, I'm skeptical Walsh is going to sustain that low strikeout rate because he never had anything that low in the minors, but I do think he's a legit power hitter and worth drafting in this range.
The next group of 4 we see is Rowdy Tellez, Bobby Dahlbeck of the Boston Red Sox, Brandon Belt with the Giants, and Ryan McMahon with the Rockies. I will quickly hit on Rowdy Tellez, who I was pretty excited about earlier in the offseason, but now with all the depth with the Toronto Blue Jays, I guess there's still a chance that he does play every day, but he really needs to perform. And I guess you could say that about a few other Blue Jays now as well, because if not, there are other names to kind of pick up the slack here. But Rowdy Tellez was fantastic last year. 35 games. He batted .283 with an .886 OPS. He cut his strikeout rate in half from 28% in 2019. Well, I guess it's not completely in half, to 15.7% in 2020. And for anyone who's worried about him platooning, he had an .811 OPS against lefties in 2020 and an .831 mark in 2019. So I still do like Rowdy Tellez, but I had to pump the brakes just a little bit. We'll end with this group, and we'll throw it your way, Chris. Joey Votto, Jeimer Candelario, Nate Lowe, who we already spoke about, and Renato Nunez, who just signed a minor league deal with the Detroit Tigers. And I think he's probably going to get a chance to play.
Yeah, he can basically be what CJ Cron was for the Tigers, which is, I don't know if it's quite damning with faint praise, but he's interesting. He can be a source of power. Candelario, I don't think I have him ranked in the fantasy relevant range. It's basically one season where he's hit anything like this. Votto bounce back season is real. He changed his approach in the second half of the season, started hitting for more power, seemed to sacrifice some of his plate discipline for power. He was still walking a ton though, just struck out more. And at the very least, it shows me that, one of the game's great tinkerers still has some tricks left. And, it wouldn't surprise me if he hit like 260 with 25 home runs.
I will admit that Jeimer Candelario is not exciting. The Tigers are expected to be a subpar lineup, I think we could say quite confidently, but he did hit 297 last year, 503 slug with a 277 expected batting average and a 469 expected slug. The 90-mile-per-hour average exit velocity was the best of his career. His 10% barrel rate was the best of his career. So if you're buying into any of that from the shortened season, then Jeimer Candelario could be a name for you. Scott, clean us up. We could wrap up the show. Anyone that we missed or anyone that you would like to hit on that we just talked about?
Well, you kind of breezed by the name Bobby Dahlbeck of the Red Sox. He's in line to be their everyday first baseman after homering 8 times in 92 at-bats down the stretch last season. I think he's a 3 true outcomes guy, and probably not going to help you in batting average, but could be a big source of power late. I'm thinking especially in like a 15-team roto league. He's somebody who I will not be sleeping on.
Can I say one more name?
Yes, you can.
Brandon Belt in the hitter's haven that is San Francisco. He's always been a good hitter who's been held back in the terms of power by his home park, but it was a better place to hit. Giants have a sneaky good lineup, and I would be thrilled if Brandon Belt's 2020 were real and he had a late career resurgence, because that dude's awesome.
Brandon Belt, along with many other Giants, had this awesome statistical 2020 season, and I wonder if it has anything to do with their manager front office combination of Gabe Kapler and Farhan Zaidi, who are both analytically driven. So perhaps they've figured some things out for some of their players, but Brandon Belt, 96th percentile in expected slugging percentage, barrel rate, and expected WOBA last year. So a name to remember late in your drafts as a corner infielder is one Brandon Belt. We're going to wrap there. First base position preview for Chris and Scott. I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.